Alright, so this is a little video on custom blocks, specifically the mini Christmas tree that was released recently, and why I believe that it does not give the odds that it claims that it does, especially when they're combined in chunks where you have multiple mini Christmas trees in the same chunk. So to start off, here are some clips of me crafting. First, I crafted 9 stacks of axes, as you can see here, and after each stack is crafted, you can see how many times the mini Christmas tree procced, and you can see that in chat as well. And then next, I have recrafting, which I took a lot of the axes that fell on the ground. I think I took around 140 of them and recrafted them. And you'll see similar to the chances of procs on the straight up crafts. The recrafts, it's similar. A good bit less than what it should be, considering this chunk supposedly has a 10% chance to proc on any given craft or recraft. So to prove that there is indeed an issue with the chances of it proccing, I'm going to use some statistics, and it's a bit complicated, but essentially I'm just going to be comparing the probability that we saw in those clips, considering the number of samples that were taken, and compare that to sort of an ideal population in which the chances are known to be exactly 10%, which is what they were in the chunk that I was crafting earlier. So basically I'm just going to be taking the number of samples, figuring out what the probability of it proccing during that sample was, and then comparing that to an exactly 10% chance. All right, so to do this, we're going to be using a test called a one sample z-test or a one proportion z-test. And essentially, to keep things simple, the proportion that is supposedly exactly 10% is that p naught or that p sub 0, and then the p hat, or the p with a little mark on top of it, is the observed proportion of the sample, which is what we saw in those clips. And so this calculation is done, n is equal to the number of trials in the sample, and then that z value will tell us approximately how likely the chances are to see what we saw if a population is at exactly the proportion that we're told it is. So once again, I'm not going to dwell too long on this, but here are the preliminary calculations. So this is just taking the formula that I showed before, plugging in the numbers. As you can see, I went ahead and put the axe craft and the axe recrafts together to form one sample size. And as you can see, the average was about 5.4% chance. And obviously that is a considerable bit lower than 10, but I just want to go ahead and go a step further and prove that this is not due to luck or due to random chance, and that it's really an incredibly low chance that in this type of sample that it would be under a population of exactly 10%, or anywhere near 10%, frankly. So as you can see, these calculations yielded a z-score of negative 4.09. So for those of you who don't know, z-score is essentially a measure of the distance away from a mean that a sample is, assuming it's normally distributed, which we are assuming that for this data. And as you can see, this chart includes about 99.7% of values, and it goes from a z-score of -3 to +3. And we know that our z-score we just calculated is less than -4, meaning it is in the incredible minority of all data, assuming that our mean is indeed 10%. So this is a z-score table or a z-table, and it's used to find the probability of a certain event happening at a certain z-score level. And so ours was -4.09 approximately, so we'll go to that very bottom row and that very most right-hand column, and we can see that an incredibly small number, 0.00002, and that is actually the probability that we would observe what we actually did see in the video clips if the population were indeed exactly zero point 0.1 probability of proccing on the mini Christmas tree. So that incredibly small number, 0.00002, that's essentially 1 in 46,000, meaning if a player had an actual 10% chance to get a proc off the mini Christmas tree and they crafted 46,000 inventories of axes, they would only expect to see about one inventory out of those 46,000 have as few procs as the one in the clip did. And considering that clip was a single random sample, and it wasn't taken from tens of thousands of trials, and isolated as a one particular low sample, that essentially means there is no way that that chance is actually 10%. Um, so obviously I could experiment with other percent chances and see what the issue might be, but I'm going to leave that up to the devs or whoever is taking care of this issue. Just essentially, I just wanted to use some statistics and have a little bit of fun to prove that the chance of proccing on a craft is truly much less than 10%. My estimates were around 5.2, I believe. Not to say that it's exactly that, but it is certainly a good bit less than the 10% that it should be.